soldiers, and I remember speaking with my cousin Kevin at the time, Kevin Carroll, and saying that if we let this happen, if we stand by and let this, what happened today happen, then what is next? And I've watched my whole life, and the first leaflet I made was in 2004, and in this leaflet it spoke of the huge racism and violence and the sexual exploitation of our young girls and our daughters and our sisters being aimed at us from the Muslim community, and the fact that no one's doing anything. The fact that the police are allowing this to happen. When I talked to you, I had a cousin, a second cousin, who was gang raped by Muslim men. She was hooked on drugs by them, groomed. We call it in this country, they call it grooming. And she was gang raped. And I remember when I was a young boy, probably 11 and 12 at the time, listening to the big family meetings and the families crying about what was happening. And they'd go to the police, and the police would do nothing. They wouldn't arrest these men. And that may sound unbelievable to people sitting there thinking, what, these men raped her, and they wouldn't do anything.
Our conservative estimate is that at least 1,400 individual children in Rotherham were victims of sexual exploitation over the 16 years. By victims, we are not talking about children who were at risk of sexual exploitation, who were friendly with victims, or who moved in the same circle. The 1,400 victims are those who had actually experienced sexual exploitation, as I have just defined it. We estimate that 1/3 of them were already known to services on account of neglect or child protection. It is hard to describe the appalling nature of the abuse the child victims suffered. They were raped by multiple perpetrators. They were trafficked to other towns and cities in the north of England. They were abducted, beaten and intimidated. There were examples of children being doused with petrol and threatened with being set alight. They were threatened with guns, made to witness brutally violent rapes, and threatened they would be the next if they told anyone. Girls as young as 11 were raped by large numbers of male perpetrators. The detail of this information and the 15 pen pictures of exploited children, which we include in Chapter 5 of the report, were all taken from official records, files and minutes. And we could have described many other children whose experiences were just as awful. Evidence of sexual exploitation of children in Rotherham emerged in the middle to late 1990s. A council youth service called Risky Business made the evidence known to the police and social services, not least by referring young people who needed the help which only the statutory services could provide. In most cases, especially in the early days, the evidence was disbelieved, suppressed or ignored. In the early to mid-2000s, sexual exploitation seemed to have little priority in either service. Child victims were often blamed for what had happened to them, while no action was taken against the perpetrators. It did not seem to occur to many of those involved that any kind of sexual activity with a child is a crime, meriting investigation and prosecution. In Chapter 10, we set out the findings of 3 reports, which described the nature and growing extent of sexual exploitation in Rotherham in the early 2000s.
Do your own research, see what's going on in Sweden.
The reports were submitted to the police and social services and were ignored. In one case, the author was punished for speaking truth to power.
They would not do anything. When you went to the system that's supposed to protect you, they failed you. And this has all now become clear evidence. Everyone now knows this through government reports on a town called Rotherham in the UK, where 1,400 young girls were gang raped by Muslim men. And it's come out that the authorities, social services, the police, the mosque leaders, there was a conspiracy of silence between all of them to allow and facilitate the rape of our youth. And the reason given? They didn't want to be deemed as racist. That's how powerful political correctness has become. Yes, after September 11th, in the days afterwards, as the world was shocked, I think everyone can remember where they were that day. I remember where I was. I was working at Britannia Airways at Luton Airport. And I remember it all unfolding. And within days, we had posters put at our local shops. When you went up to the shops, this is what I try and get people to understand. So people who don't understand where we're from and what it was like growing up where we grew up. They had posters, Magnificent 19. And they had a picture of 19 symbols, and then the Magnificent 19 for the 19 hijackers. They were glorifying them as this great thing they'd done. Then, in the colleges, all the Muslims were celebrating. And then every year after that, in the coming years, we had a mass celebration parade in our town centre by the Muslim community for September 11th. On September 11th.
And what did the people of Luton think about that?
Horrified. This has all been... The trouble is, they've got such a grip on the town, through the gangs, through the drugs, through the violence. Everyone's scared. A lot of people are scared. And that's what changed in 2009 after Soldiers' Homecoming Parade. Because that was... People think that that's what started this fight back. That wasn't it. That was the final thing. There have been things happening week on, every month. Attacks, rapes, extremism, terrorism. All these things. And in the end, with the soldiers, because we're very proud of our armed forces, especially the people of Luton and the men of Luton. And it was at that point we said, enough's enough. Now we fight back. Now we make sure the world knows what's going on in our town. Yeah, so Muslims in general don't integrate into anything to do with non-Muslims. So they have their own of everything. Even, do you know one thing that shocked me with this? You can speak about the local football stadium. Sorry. Our football stadium is in the heart of the Islamic ghetto, surrounded by 30 mosques. It's where all the Muslims live. You go into that stadium on Saturday afternoon, there's no non-Muslims that live there. But yet on a Saturday, there's 10,000 non-Muslims in the stadium and not one Muslim. So the ground's been there since the Muslim community have been there. They've never once got involved in supporting the local team. You go to an England football match, there's no Muslims. It becomes the Queen's Jubilee, there's no Muslims. You go to any national celebration of our country, there's no Muslims. They do not integrate or assimilate into any part of our life. Even one thing which I found was crazy, I got into a debate on the radio with a supposedly gay Muslim, and I found out that they even have their own gay clubs, Muslim gay clubs. So even in that sense, they don't integrate. They still everything separate themselves from.
Is that ever going to change? Second generation?
It is never ever going to change. When I never understood any of this, and when I spent 22 weeks on solitary confinement, where
22 weeks?
22 weeks on solitary confinement, where I had nothing else other than a book, and that book was the Quran, and I read it, and I broke it down. And I tried to understand it. And I say, for example, I just wrote references. So I started off with where any comment of Muslims not being allowed to be friends with non-Muslims. Do not be friends with Christians and Jews. I wrote the verse number. And before I knew it,